Travis, my good soul. Today is the 20th of not pronounced that way, but in the Jewish spelling, it is the same word. It's the word for light. Murdoch travel, you've probably seen, as they put in the heart. They know what they're doing. Because Hyrum and Thummim. Hyrum is the plural of and so thus lights and completions, perfections. Be therefore Thummim, even as your Father and I. So on this date, in Jewish nightmare history, we have the traditional belief, this is not fact, the traditional belief that in 1312 BCE, and again I repeat, this is tradition, not literal history, the Israelites departed from Mount Sinai. This was the time to go to Zion. Also, in 1288 CE, 13, it's in red, so there's no link to it anymore. Troyes Jews were burned at the stake by the Inquisition. They were accused of murdering a Christian child. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the symbolism of Jesus. 13? Oh, well, this was before the Knights Templar. Huh, that's interesting. That's where the Pope got it from, I guess. He apparently were accused of murdering a Christian child. And so they selected 13 rich Jews to be killed as a blood libel in Switzerland. Yeah, they're neutral, aren't they? 1637 CE, Venetian Jews were forbidden the right to practice law or to act as advocates in the courts in the Republic of Venice. 1939 CE, Mount Scorpus Hospital opened on Mount Scorpus, Jerusalem. It had a 300-bed academy medical facility. And Eric Mendelssohn was the architect. 1942. Yeah, this has nothing to do with Jewish tradition either, right, Christians? All pregnant women in Kovno ghetto sentenced to death by the Nazis. So, yeah, the Jews have not been treated well, have they, Christians? Because Roman Emperor Constantine created Jesus with the creation of Christianity. The word has existed before. Jesus as a name had existed before. But this was the date, 325 CE, when Christianity with Jesus was created. And because it was created, they had to pull an anachronism on all the scriptures, turning them into testaments of Jesus Christ. turning them into literal history, when the Jews wrote their scriptures as manner of prophesying of revelation for the latter days. None of it is literal history. And so, yeah, you might say, well, the King's List, that's legitimate. Well, only to a certain point. Archaeologists can't go much further into the Assyrian period, or beyond that. Most technically, that's where records start to get lost. And it's because people are incorrectly believing that the Jews were their own kingdom under King David, that they were not tributary. They were tributary. See, Assyria, when they came in, the northern kingdom were now tributary to Assyria. They had to give tribute to the capital of Assyria to support the capital. That's the economy that was designed by Assyrian, is that the land is to produce, to help support those who work at the capital, because they're not able to be farmers. And so it was military enforced. And then Babylon, when they conquered Assyria, came and subjected Jerusalem, Judah, to the Babylonians to become tribute. But before this, the whole land of Canaan was subject to Egypt. It was never an independent nation. So, the Jews of today, Israelis, are very fortunate to have, for the first time, a recognized state of Israel, despite all of the problems with their neighbors who do not understand it is not their land either. And if you're thinking, oh, it's the Egyptians' land, no, Egypt was taken over also. So those who reside in Egypt are no longer Egyptian. They're only called Egyptian because they live in Egypt. Similar in the Book of Mormon. Those who resided in Judah were called Jews. They were not the Jews as we know it today, who were in the Babylonian captivity. And I was really furious with a dumbass Mormon who thinks that the six-pointed star of the Jews means it's 666. Just full of hate. My hell. And so I didn't want to run the risk of reporting him to YouTube only to have YouTube disregard it. Mormon employee tends to do that. And so I had to ban him, even though I wanted to kick his ass. The Jews did not murder Jesus. He didn't exist. The Christians replaced the Jews. Are you listening, all you white supremacists? Ye who claim you don't want the Jews to replace you when you replace the Jews. So, with that background history in place, and there's more to the story, on 9/11/1826, Joseph Smith Sr. was working with William Morgan on a book warning about the threat to America by the Illuminati, formed on May 1st, 1776 by Johann Adam Weishaupt, with 5 members for the inverted pentagram of Lucifer. Illuminati, light bearer, Illumination. Yeah, what's with Illumination Studios? Despicable Me, hilarious with the minions, but it's very suspicious when people use the symbolisms. And so they found out that William Morgan was going to expose their plot to destroy America right now, 200 years later. They were going to use the Bible with the Jewish prophecies of science for astronomy, giving star dates of the future. Revelation chapters 12 and 19 specifically for the beginning and the end of the latter days. 2017, 2024. To coordinate their attack. Christians are anti-science, and so they would be clueless to this plot because of it. And so they were going to purposely fulfill the prophecies of doom, because mankind is evil and mankind can do that. And they were going to tease Christians into believing that Jesus Christ was going to be coming for a second time, having failed the first time to save the Jews. And so, yeah, they now changed it to saving the Christians. That's not the prophecy. Jeremiah chapter 23, starting in verse 5. And so they had William Morgan arrested. And in the early days of America, when you got locked up in jail and you couldn't afford bail, you were in debtor's prison. And so it became necessary to free William Morgan and have him escape the country, flee the country. So as the Master Mason, Joseph Smith Sr. made the arrangements. David Miller of the Batavian Press, who fronted William Morgan with the money for the book, which is unusual. It means he had something with the publication of the book. And William Morgan, David Miller provided the carriage to take him to Canada, where there was an incident that nobody wants to talk about as to how Thomas Monroe ended up dead in the lake or river there, the waters, with William Morgan's clothes, because they were going to assume that was William Morgan and call the case closed, except for Thomas Monroe's wife went looking for him and identified the body and said, "What's he doing in those clothes?" Oops. And so the search continued for William Morgan. And a reporter took on the story and published it and scared America to be anti-Freemasonry as a whole, because the Illuminati had infiltrated the Scottish Rites here in America. That's the 33-degree Masons, to be distinguished from Joseph Smith Sr., who was a York Rites, which is the Knights Templar, the Holy Grail, the bloodline of Solomon from King David for the latter days. Just like the Jews. The Holy Grail is the secret of the latter-day Christ, who would be Emmanuel, not Jesus, a man like Moses, after the learning of the Jews. And as Jeremiah prophesied, because you did look it up, right? Yeah, he's the son of David, descendant. And so Joseph Smith Sr. took on the responsibility to finish the book. But he can't do it. There are people hunting for the manuscripts. There are people wanting to murder whoever caused the burning down of the temples with the anti-Mason movement, thanks to the reporter, causing fear in the public. They wanted revenge. And so, a manhunt ensued. Couldn't find anything. Isn't it interesting that Joseph Smith refers to this after he got the plates? The Egyptian gold plates of the Knights Templar. Interesting. And that's the Book of Mormon. Interesting. The Book of Mormon is in the learning of the Jews. It's a manner of prophesying of revelation for the latter days. And wouldn't you know it, there's the astronomical time from a star constellation of Revelation chapter 12 at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon starts us off in 2017. Interesting. And so, Sidney Rigdon's the major author of the Book of Mormon. The Smiths knew him prior to, and enlisted him to work on the book, to have and hold on to the manuscript pages. Joseph Smith had them copied, as Martin Harris, who was on the anti-Mason committee in Palmyra, was the money man, but only if he could participate. And so, that's why he insisted on having characters so that he can take them and have them verified, because he wanted to be a part of this. He wants to make sure this is legitimate. And so Joseph Smith obliged. And so they used that to fulfill the Isaiah prophecy. And then, as they were getting to 116 pages, Joseph Smith's son dies. And during that moment of weakness, Martin Harris steals the manuscript pages that he had copied from the copies that Joseph Smith had made. So they already had the original 116 pages. And so they could have made an exact translation as before, but we are informed that that is the tactic of the enemy to ruin the whole thing. And so, we don't have the original manuscript pages, but it doesn't matter, because Joseph Smith Sr., as the Master Mason, who was responsible for making sure that the book gets published, took on the responsibility to fix the error of his son and rewrote the 116 pages. And so it's exactly as it was supposed to be written, even though it had to be rewritten. It's just in a different story form than the original, which was supposed to be about Lehi. And so now it's an abridgment of Lehi, or an abridgment of an abridgment, a different form of abridgment, because originally it was the abridgment of Lehi that was supposed to be put in the beginning, and so with it gone and needing to change it up so that Martin Harris doesn't freak out and think that it has ties to the Freemason threat, because there are a lot of Freemason symbolisms in even the rewritten pages. But Joseph Smith Sr., as a Jewish mystic, Jewish Kabbalah, which is not witchcraft, do not be a hater, incorporated more of that, thus the Tree of Life. But you still see Nephi building a temple after the pattern of King Solomon, Knights Templar. Zion, specifically written as he escapes his brethren in an Exodus pattern and gets to the land which became known as the land of Nephi and builds the Zion temple, the temple of Nephi, which is patterned after Solomon's temple, mountain city. So, yeah, the mountain cities, the two D's in Paleo-Hebrew. That's why it's two mountain cities. For David, which is the sun symbol of Emmanuel. Because it comes from the Egyptian sun god, Amun. Amun-El. God Amun of the Egyptians, the sun god at noonday. Now go back and reread your Joseph Smith first and second visions. Oh, there it is. So it's not Jesus who appears to Joseph Smith, is it? It's not Moroni. They specifically named him Nephi. Joseph didn't make an error. Joseph Smith doesn't need to be corrected. Bleeping Mormons who claim the founder but then say he's wrong. Go to hell. So, 1832, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball joined the church. Heber C. Kimball reveals in his journal that he knew that the Smiths were involved. And so Heber C. Kimball lies in his journal? That's strange. Why would he lie in his journal? You'd think he would confess and tell the truth in his journal, unless he expected other people to be reading his journal in the future. Didn't want people to know, because there's a plot that's going to be taking place in 200 years. Can't have anybody ruin it. Yes, Heber C. Kimball was among those of the Illuminati Scottish Rites who were plotting to overthrow America and enlisted the help of Brigham Young, who was already upset with the church for not healing his wife, who would go on to die without being healed by priesthood power. So both of them wanted revenge on the Church of Christ. And so they were immediately assigned to be missionaries, to go out and give the Book of Mormon to people. You know, the warning threat of against America in the latter days. That talks about the great and abominable church. Verse 19 of the first vision. And so, yes, they lied to people. They first went and recruited those of the Illuminati Scottish Rites from their hometowns who wanted revenge on whoever did this to them. There was a new Masonic temple being built near Heber's location. He would have had the opportunity to actually become a member of the Scottish Rites Freemasonry, but he lied and said that he became a Master Mason, which means he would have had his own temple. And yes, things were different then than they are now. reminding people of this because people just don't think. They just rush to hasty accusations to justify violence and hatred. And these Scottish Rites Illuminati likewise became missionaries, spreading the Book of Mormon around. And so they converted people who were not affiliated with the plot to overthrow America in the future and told them that Joseph Smith's church is a Christian church and Jesus is the Christ. Do I need to remind you again of verse 19 of the first vision? Do I need to remind you again of history with Roman Emperor Constantine? They called themselves the Danites, and they were militarily structured. There was a ranking order. And so you can see in Wikipedia various Danite Mormons who had leadership ranks, but they were not the boss. Brigham Young was the boss. Heber C. Kimball was the counselor. And they would have had an underboss, and then the lieutenants, and then soldiers. The lieutenants were the leaders. Though technically Brigham Young changed it so that his quorum of the 12 became the lieutenants, and that the president of the 12, as it would be after the assassination of Joseph Smith, by them, we're getting to it, would be the underboss to take over from the boss, who became the replacement of Joseph Smith in violation of Joseph Smith. Section 107, verse 22. It's supposed to be 3 presidents, not 1 with 2 counselors. Just like in the Quorum of the 70, it is 7 presidents. And so these Danites were constantly going around committing crimes against the neighbors. Because they were a secret combination, Joseph Smith was unaware of this. But Joseph Smith, as leader of the Mormons, was blamed and framed for the crimes. And so Joseph only knows that the neighbors are attacking the Mormons. He doesn't understand that it was first caused by these secret Danites. But Joseph Smith is getting arrested over and over again. He's being kept out of the way so that Brigham Young and his 12 can lead the church. And so finally, in 1838, the Danites have risen sufficiently to power, as they had again failed to keep Joseph Smith locked up in jail. With the failure of his bank, the Danites purposely withdrew loans from the bank and didn't pay them back to sabotage it. And it worked, but Joseph got out. And so in 1838, Joseph Smith writes his visionary account. And no, it is not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Do not even bother to read the Joseph Smith papers to see what's different. You guys are a disgrace. You claim Joseph's church is true, and yet you won't even check. Willard Richards put it in there. And so that infuriated the Danites, because Joseph Smith was declaring his church as Jewish, not Christian. And so they needed to do something more extreme. So they gathered at their secret headquarters base to mock Joseph Smith at Adam Ondi Amen, spelled wrong. Illiterate bastards. And from there, they then gathered and marched down to the polling place to make sure that their candidate won. And they caused election fraud. And Representative Chris Stewart, in the United States House of Representatives from Utah, his ancestor was the first punch that got knocked to the floor, and thus started the Mormon War, with election fraud and a war. And it was known as the Mormon War rather than the Danite War, because they were the secret combination, framing the church, framing Joseph Smith to get him in trouble, to destroy his church. And they succeeded in getting Joseph Smith locked up in Liberty Jail. And then they have lied about what happened during that period of time, claiming that Joseph Smith excommunicated Thomas B. Marsh so that Brigham Young could then have a vote of the remaining loyalists in his 12 to vote him as president. He cooed the church leadership with his Danites. And this is when the Whitmers left, and this is when Cowdery left. Although Cowdery seems to have left because of his jealousy over Joseph Smith buddying up with Sidney Rigdon. He wanted to have the church go in a certain way. And he and Joseph and Sidney Rigdon were pushing for another direction. They were more in line with the prophecies to protect the church from the threat in the latter days. So Oliver Cowdery took his basketball and went home. And thus the reason why he never divulged the secret of the Book of Mormon, that he was a part of writing it and babysitting Joseph Smith after Joseph Smith had failed to keep Martin Harris from stealing the manuscripts. That's why Joseph Smith had to go into timeout, is because they needed to go underground to let it mull over and hope that the anti-Mason committee were not going to leak it to the Illuminati Scottish Rites, which, oops, Heber found out. And so, yeah, the church was organized with 6 young men. Not the fathers, the young men. That's why. 6-pointed star of the Jews. For Emmanuel, their Christ. Not Lucifer, the Illuminati Christ, with 5 points. And so Joseph Smith got out, and he talked to the 12, condemned them for exalting themselves and for getting rid of a good man, Thomas B. Marsh. Thomas B. Marsh did not want to come back to the church. Joseph Smith put back others who were wrongly excommunicated. And Brigham Young would use that against Orson Hyde, here in the valley, because Orson Hyde was very opposed, publicly opposed even, would get up at the pulpit of conference to denounce Brigham Young's Adam God. And so in the last year before Brigham Young died, he changed the order of the Quorum of the 12, because he had set it up for the underboss to become the successor of him. And so with Orson Hyde in the pole position to be the successor, he then said, wait a minute, in 1838, you were excommunicated. And so when Joseph put you back in, that moved your rank. And so you are now going to be put back into that ranking position where you were when you came back in. And so John Taylor became the pole position. Yeah, John Taylor was there in Carthage jail. And so here we come to the Carthage jail. So the Danites had failed to keep Joseph Smith out of the picture. He keeps getting out. And he's now running for president of the United States. And so Brigham Young, with his Danites, formed a Council of 50 as a secret combination government if Joseph Smith were to win the presidency. This was just a backup plan. And of course they had to claim that Joseph Smith was involved. You know, frame Joseph Smith. And even Sidney Rigdon was framed for being part of it. And so the minutes were forged to say that they were sometimes involved. And Brigham Young, at that point, had a new assignment. He was to go around and tell the East Coast that Joseph Smith is running for president. No longer going around telling people about the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Smith's platform was to free the Jews, or free the slaves, and other such things. He named it a different party platform, though Hyrum made it understood that they knew that party government was going to be the ruin of America, thanks to Thomas Jefferson. Constitution of the United States of America says no socialist republics, no representative republics. It is to be a constitutional republic. Big difference in organization structure. And so there's lots of things in the Constitution that you're going, why aren't we doing this? Where is the amendment that tells us what we're doing now? Yeah, it's not in there, is it? We have never followed the Constitution. And so everybody who thinks that the American experiment is failing doesn't understand. This is not the American experiment. We've never followed the American experiment. And so they're tricking you, purposely, maliciously tricking you into thinking that a constitutional republic does not work, so that they can impose a fascist government over America. A representative republic. And yeah, the whole print press, no, Joseph Smith was not in that meeting. Joseph Smith did not give that order. And it was by John C. Bennett, who had gone to the guy to start the press and publish his little article. John C. Bennett was a convert to the church, but was tied to the Danites because he was practicing polygamy, as the Danites were in secret. And so when Joseph Smith found out about it, he excommunicated him. Polygamy is not to be practiced in the church. Even if it is just spiritual wifery, adultery. And so he went back to the Danites, asking to be taken back. And they can't have him. They would expose them. And so he was denied being protected by the Danites. And so John C. Bennett formed his own Illuminati organization, Halcyon Order, and was involved with James Strang's order after Joseph Smith had died as well, and was involved in the polygamy that he had started and then suddenly was assassinated mysteriously for, as those who were in his church then left. Though I think there was still those who were trying to continue it on with the practice of polygamy. And so, yeah, people were really screwed up in the church because of these Danites, causing confusion and chaos, telling them that it's a Christian church with Jesus, telling them that Joseph is okay with polygamy and other crimes because they're heathens. And he's a prophet of Jesus. So yeah, there was major damage done. And they succeeded in conquering. With the takedown of the press, and after Joseph Smith came out with the King Follett Discourse, that again violated Christian dogma. Man can become gods? Heavenly Father was once a man? Blasphemy! Burn the witch! Yeah. And so, because of the Book of Mormon, this is what caused the assassination. But Joseph Smith kept getting out and kept publishing that he's Jewish. And so he needed to be silenced as a result. So the destruction of the press got him arrested again. Danites escorted Joseph and Hyrum to the jail. John Taylor and Willard Richards of the 12 also stayed behind when the Danites left. And so Joseph, knowing that John Solomon Fulmer was not a member of the Danites and was there loyal to Joseph Smith, being in the Nauvoo Legion with Joseph, whispered to John that his bloodline would need to be preserved and therefore need to go with Brigham Young when he flees the country. And he gave him his single-shot pistol when he went back to get the Nauvoo Legion to help Joseph. They didn't get back in time. And when a Wheelock, I think is the name of the guy, who was a friend of John Taylor's but didn't know anything about the plot and the conspiracy to have Joseph murdered, came to visit, he gave Joseph Smith his six-shooter. And that six-shooter became Joseph's, as Joseph gave the single-shot pistol to Hyrum. Not to John Taylor, not to Willard Richards. They're not being accused. So why are they still there? Joseph Smith, in July 1840, called out Brigham Young and his 12 as Judas and prophesied that they would seek to murder Joseph Smith. Is Joseph Smith a prophet, Mormons? Because here we go. An untold prophecy of Joseph Smith is about to be fulfilled that Brigham Young did not want published, but it's in the Joseph Smith papers. The forensics of the crime scene have blood from Hyrum Smith on the floor. There's a pistol shot through the door that would have hit Hyrum Smith in the chest. Hyrum Smith does not have a chest wound. John Taylor had more than 3 balls that hit him and his pocket watch from a pistol. The mob did not have pistols. They had rifles. So who shot who? Because it wasn't the mob. The mob was from the Warsaw Lodge of Freemasonry. They were paid by Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. Depending on which Bible story you want to use, it was 20 pieces of silver or 30 pieces of silver. And I use that metaphorically. And so when Governor Boggs, or it was actually Nauvoo, the governor of Nauvoo ordered the mob not to go through with the assassination. They got the message in time. They refused and proceeded onward. Because they had rifles, they could not take them up into the upper level of Carthage jail where Joseph and Hyrum were. They had to leave them outside. And so they went up one by one because of the narrowness of the stairs. And Joseph, with his 6-shooter, was waiting at the top of the stairs for them. Shot 3 balls, hit 3 guys. Those 3 guys were the ones in court who were acquitted. Because they didn't murder Joseph. They got shot and ran out of the building and tended to their wounds. So what happened? Who shot who? How did Joseph and Hyrum end up dead if the mob was outside? Well, remember, Joseph still has 3 balls. In a pistol. Joseph shot John Taylor with the remaining 3 balls, one of which hit him in his pocket watch. So we now know the time when this occurred. But the church has had those hands removed so that later pictures are no longer available. So you have to have one of the original Doctrine and Covenants manuals or church history manuals, whichever one it was in, to see the watch with the hands. or know somebody who has it. And the reason why Joseph Smith sought John Taylor was because Hyrum Smith, with a single shot, got shot up in the jaw, which would have been through wrestling for control of the pistol by John Taylor. And that felled Hyrum to the floor. But that doesn't cause the blood stain. Joseph then goes over to his brother and is weeping over his body. John Taylor, the coward, fled under the bed. And yet somehow Joseph Smith is shot and falls out the window. If you've seen the window ledge, it's too wide. You can't just stand at the window, get shot in the back or in the front, and fall forward out the window. You'd be hanging there at the window. You'd have to be leaning out over halfway, and nobody in their right mind would be doing that. Joseph Smith wouldn't be calling out the widow's son call for help among those who are there to kill him. You're not going to get any help from them. That did not happen. What did happen is that Willard Richards, after the 6-shooter was given to Joseph Smith, then called for wine. He was not obligated to stay in prison. He was not under arrest. And so he was able to go out, talk to the guard, and acquire his own 6-shooter. It was Willard Richards who, while Joseph Smith was kneeling and weeping over his brother, came from behind, from the corner that he was hiding in, and shot Joseph Smith in the back, and then took his body and threw it out the window to the mob below, where they then shot him repeatedly. But if you're unfamiliar with a rifle shot, because the way John Taylor said it in his account for Mormons, not the court, balls were flying all over the place through the door. Huh? There's some explaining to do. Rifles are super long, and you have to put in the gunpowder, tamp it down, put in the ball, tamp it down, boom. Set it down, tamp in the gunpowder, tamp in the ball, boom. It's slower than the framed assassin of John F. Kennedy. Again, forensic evidence. And so no, there was no way for John Taylor's story to be accurate. He lied. And yet we need to get rid of that blasphemous scripture in our Doctrine and Covenants. Because that also has caused problems among non-Mormons and ex-Mormons, attributing Joseph Smith to being second only to Jesus. Joseph Smith was the Christ of Mormons, according to the learning of the Jews. That's what you do not get. because of your hatred and anti-Semitism that the church has imposed upon you. Hyrum, or Willard Richards, then came over to Hyrum and shot him in the face, causing the blood stain on the floor. And then had to shoot John a couple more times to cover up that Joseph was the one who shot him. And so any accounts of Joseph having misfired 3 times, forensic evidence dismisses the false claims of witnesses. That's why witness testimonies are only to support the evidence and to expose false witnesses. You are not supposed to use witnesses to base your whole case on. But they weren't involved in the court trial anyway. And so, thus is the real assassination of Joseph Smith an inside job. Brigham Young rewarded Willard Richards, as Willard Richards then was assigned to rewrite church history, forge documents such as tithing for the 1844 Doctrine and Covenants after Joseph Smith had died, so that Brigham Young could have an economy established to require Mormons to pay if they wanted to go to the temple. That's when it began, the protection racket of Mormonism under Brigham Young, which got the church shut down in 1887 for the Perpetual Immigration Fund. So now it's called a protection racket, and under RICO, criminal organizations are able to be shut down and punished for their mishandling of funds. And of course there's laundering that's involved, money laundering that's involved by the church as well. And so the outside of the Nauvoo temple was redesigned by Brigham Young. And instead of the original design, we now have 3 sun symbols that are a pattern on the Nauvoo temple. They are placed in vertical order. And if you know Egyptian, the Egyptians had a different name for sunrise, noonday, and sunset. Can you guess what the name of the sun at noonday is? Amen, Emmanuel. And so there's the sunrise, noonday, sunset suns. The sunrise sun is the sunstone. That's the rising sun. The sunset stone is the Jewish star. And in the middle, at the noonday position of Emmanuel, is instead the inverted pentagram of Lucifer, of the Illuminati. Let me read to you. We'll read from the Book of Mormon, because Mormons would be outraged if I read it from Isaiah. Second Nephi, chapter 24. How art thou fallen from heaven? The universal symbol of the falling star, the inverted pentagram. O Lucifer, That's Latin for bearer of light, light bearer. It was first put in the Latin Vulgate text of Isaiah. That's when it first appeared. 400 CE. It was actually 380, 98, something like that. Son of the morning, the rising star. This is Venus. Venus is associated with the five-pointed star, the inverted pentagram, as the bride of the church as well, of Lucifer, the wife of Mars. Art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Amen. The sun at noonday. And there he has, on the Nauvoo temple, the inverted pentagram of Lucifer that never ascends to the throne, having ascended to the throne by murdering Joseph Smith. And so, yes, that's why on the keystone of the doors of the Salt Lake Temple, which is the headquarters temple of Zion, of Brigham Young, is the inverted pentagram. Now, if you need more evidence, because you still aren't a believer, or you're mad at me that I've exposed you, and you want me murdered like Joseph was, guess when the Nauvoo temple was dedicated? It was already built, ready to go in January. That's when Brigham Young did his second anointings to become king. And thus the reason why they fled the country, so that he can establish his kingdom. Mormons were furious that he let April 6th go by. There were many Mormons who refused to go with him and left his organization because he skipped dedicating the Nauvoo temple on April 6th. Because he waited until May 1st, the anniversary of the founding of the Illuminati. He was giving a clear signal to all the world, where all the Illuminati are, that they may know Brigham Young had found those responsible for exposing them, and that he had conquered and had taken it over, and had replaced the coded message in the Book of Mormon with another testament of Jesus Christ.